Hey guys, welcome back to the studio for another lesson. This week, I'll be showing you some of my process for integrating transcribed ideas into your own playing. Transcribing solos is a huge part of learning the language of jazz, and in our specific case, bebop. Actually, learning the phrases played by the masters of the genre is really just the beginning. Today, we're going to take a look at a couple of my favorite solos by master saxophonist Sonny. I'll share with you guys 4 phrases from these solos and teach you how to extract smaller melodic ideas from them. We'll then take these snippets of language and run them through the whole scale to see how we can manipulate a melodic structure and make it a part of our own language. Finally, we'll wrap things up by inserting some of this material into an etude over the changes to the jazz standard Solar to see how we might integrate some of Sonny's material into our own playing. You guys ready? Let's get into it. Whenever we're transcribing a solo, it's important to think about a couple of things. First should always be, does the material speak to you? I don't think you should bother transcribing something if you don't get excited by it. And second, we should consider transcribing something that we think solves a problem for our playing, or if it might teach us how to navigate a particularly common or difficult chord change. For this first section, let's take a look at a phrase from Sonny's solo on his rhythm changes tune, Sunnyside. So this is a pretty long phrase, and being that it's over rhythm changes, it covers a lot of harmonic ground. Rather than trying to incorporate this whole line into our own playing all at once, let's see if we can't break it down into a couple of smaller pieces. Here's the first little chunk that really sticks out to me as being something we should analyze further. This first chunk comes right at the top of the solo, and it's a super strong melodic statement. It really comes out of just a plain old B-flat major scale, so let's break down the structure of this chunk of the line. Starting on the second, we'll do a 2-note enclosure to the root, and then go up the chord. Once we get to the top of it, we'll come down the scale with 1 extra half step to get the resolution to land on the downbeat of the next bar. This is already a pretty valuable little melodic idea that could conceivably work over a lot more harmonic movement than just how Sonny has used it in his solo. There's a ton more we can get out of this short line by taking the structure or pattern that we distilled from it through the entire scale. Take a listen to what that sounds like. I think some of these are super cool, and they all work in the same context as the original phrase, but they can also be explored further by investigating what other harmonies we could play them over. I bet you also noticed that in some instances, I didn't use an actual half step between the last 2 notes. That's because I want the harmony to stay in the scale, and so I used a trick from Barry Harris's chromatic concept where I put a half step between 2 notes that are already a half step apart by just playing another note from the scale. My usual choice for that is to go back up a step in place of the half step that needs to be there, but it could really be any note. It just needs to take up the rhythmic space so we get the resolution that we want. Let's keep going and take a look at the next chunk from that same line. This short phrase alights right off the back of the one we just finished. Starting off the flat 7th of an F or the minor 3rd of a C, he drops down to start what appears to be a pivot arpeggio. He doesn't follow it through though, and instead goes up to the 3rd of F with 1 half step and then pivots to the root. From here he comes down with all major thirds, giving us the sound of F augmented, and then resolves up a 5th to the 2nd of a B flat or the flat 7th of a D minor. Let's apply the same exercise to this melodic fragment that we did to the last one. We use the structure that we analyzed and take it all the way through its parent scale. Take a listen to what that sounds like. Again, there's some really great ideas in there that we wouldn't have uncovered if we had just stopped at learning the original phrase. In the next section, we'll take a look at a couple long phrases from a different solo and see what we can extract from them. Obviously, we really only scratched the surface on that last solo, but for the sake of variety, let's take a look at some lines from a different Sonny solo. This next one comes from his solo on the tune Taking a Chance on Love. Take a listen to what the whole line sounds like, and then we'll go about extracting some smaller chunks from it. This is a fantastic line, and just like the previous one we analyzed, it covers a lot of harmonic ground. I also really like the fact that it doesn't use a ton of chromaticism. For one, that makes the job of analyzing it easier, but it also demonstrates that we can play super melodic lines by sometimes just staying inside the scale. We spend so much time talking about chromaticism and closures, substitutions, and all that other stuff, so it's easy to forget that at the end of the day, our primary goal as improvisers is to play melody. Now, let's put this line under a microscope and see what we can extract from it. Here's the first chunk that I think is worth analyzing in depth. This phrase is getting played over the 2 in a 2-5 that goes back to the home key, but I think it's pretty obvious that Sonny's just thinking about the 5 chord here. He starts out on the 5th of the C7, jumps down a 4th, before going back up by a minor 3rd to play this little bebop turn that resolves with the 3rd of the C7 on beat 3. From there, he just comes down the scale with 1 half step between 1 and 7 so that the flat 7 lands on the next downbeat. I actually play similar phrases to this one all the time in my solos, so it's no wonder I think it's worth putting through the same process we've done to the others. Here's what it sounds like when we take this idea through the whole C7 scale. For today's last example, let's look at a line from a little bit later in the solo. Check out the whole line, and then we'll grab a smaller chunk from it to analyze. This is another great example of some super inside playing over these changes. The fragment I want to analyze works over the short 2-5 that we get back to the home key before we move on to the bridge. Let's take a closer look at how that works together. This phrase is super melodic and gives a really clear and concise end to the A section, so it's a great candidate for analysis. Starting off with the 3rd of a C7, he goes up the scale to the root, then he comes down a 3rd, then down a 4th. Here, off the leading tone, he goes up a 3rd, and then resolves down into the root to end the phrase. Even though it's really simple and doesn't use any of our typical bebop conventions at all, it's such a strong melodic idea. And like I mentioned, it's super important to be able to play melodically and not always need to play the hippest thing in the room. Let's see what it sounds like when we take this melodic structure through the entire scale. Up next, I'll give you guys an example of how this stuff might sound when incorporated into our own playing by showing you an etude I wrote over the changes to the tune Solar. Before we do that though, I need to give a quick shout out to TrueFire.com for supporting the channel. TrueFire is an online lesson library that's host to literally thousands of courses on a wide range of musical topics from some really amazing artists and educators. With synced notation and tablature, as well as slowdown and looping features, it's super easy to follow along no matter what course you decide to pick up. You can now pre-order my course, Exploring Melodic Jazz Comping, by using the link in the description of this video. It's never been a better time to learn, practice, and play with TrueFire. If you want to get even more material than we went over today, make sure you head on over to my Patreon page and grab the PDF for today's lesson. In there, you'll find the full transcriptions for both of these Sonny Stitt solos we've been picking ideas out of. You'll also find analysis and exercises for a couple of phrases that we didn't get to today. Now, let's finish up today's lesson and check out that etude I mentioned over the changes to solar. When we're trying to incorporate new material like this into our solos, it can feel kind of forced at first. It's going to take a while before these ideas naturally start to come out in your playing. To practice this, it can be helpful to try playing either the original phrase you transcribed or one of these permutations that we worked out earlier in order to cement the sound of it in your ear and help you learn how to play it in the context of a longer solo or line. Here's an example of how that might work over the chord changes to the tune Solar. See if you can spot where I put some Sonny Stitt language and how I connected it to the rest of the etude with my more typical approach. Thanks for sticking around all the way to the end of this week's video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought of the lesson. Is there a particular solo you've transcribed that had a huge impact on your playing? Or maybe a specific player whose solos you always find enlightening or inspiring? Get in touch and let me know about it. I'd love to hear from you. As always, if you did find today's lesson helpful, make sure you give the video a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that bell for notifications too. If you want to access the PDF for today's lesson, you can grab that along with the whole back catalog for all the videos on my channel for as little as $10 a month over at my Patreon page, or by just hitting the join button right here on YouTube. A special thanks goes out to Ron Maestas and Jean-Michel Roy for being studio fans. I really appreciate the support. An extra special thanks is due to these studio members for their support as well. PH, David Zuckerbraun, Patrick Caron, Max Irwin, Everton Armstrong, Stephen Schwartz, Aaron Walters, Stephen Prager, Louis Rosen, Artie Sanchez, Zé Soares, Michael LeBroy, David Wortman, Aldo Fonseca, Ron Askew, Tyler Kosarek, Sergei Shlepakov, JCH, Milan de Kaiser, Justin Fisher, Jason Paul Dubois, Michael M., Tan Sang Ho, Rolly Zil, Apollos Jolivert, Zalkai Zoltan, Stephen White, Paul George, Severus Guo, Nikita Sketchkov, Sean Lepore, Benjamin Doxdater, Bill Benfield, Larry G., and Bruce Wood. An extra special shout out to Jazz Luminaire patrons Bill Jacob and Vibov Babadi. Thank you guys all so much for your continued support. I'm David Shore, and thanks again for hanging with me at the studio today. I'll see you guys next time.